there. So let's look at this evolutionary mind and how it works. It's shaped by a metaphor that says we're all a living, evolving system. Not just interrelated, we're all living, interrelated, and evolving. So I want to give you another story so you know that there are people actually doing this. DuPont of Canada has a peroxide business that works with the paper industry. The paper industry, you know, is an industry that's beleaguered because it has lots of consolidation that goes on, but DuPont of Canada was working with this peroxide group, and when they first started, peroxide was a commodity business. Do you know what peroxide is? You know, the process that can help bleach the paper and so forth. You can imagine that's not a very interesting thing. You'd try and buy it at the cheapest possible price, and that's what all of their customers were doing. They were looking to figure out how it is that they buy from the cheapest peroxide maker, which led DuPont of Canada to try and make it cheaper and cheaper, most efficient they possibly could. Now, they're a good company, again, so they were working on trying to manage the waste that came out of it. When they finally stepped up to, because of, again, lots of conversations that were going on, partly inside, they started looking at how could they be more protective about the environmental damage that they were doing. And they found that they maybe could create some closed systems around peroxide. So they did. They planned to do some building of wetlands and barriers and things that would take care of the area, particularly around the paper mill. They thought you could even go build some of these for the paper mill. Those were possibilities that were on the table. But finally, there's one guy in there. His name is Frank. Frank was a guy who said, you know, if you really begin to visualize this as a living system, and what he meant was, think about where paper comes from. They engaged in a process of going all the way back upstream to the planting of trees, to the working of trees, and how it moved all the way through a paper mill. And they did this work with the people who were in the paper mills. What they looked at is what is really the essence of a really high-quality coated paper, and what does it take to get there. In this process, Frank became so excited about what it takes to make really good paper, he actually went back and got an education as a forester, because he discovered that healthy forests were really what it took to make beautiful paper. Now, most people don't do that. If you're working in a paper mill, you're supposed to make your paper cheap. You're supposed to do it to standard, right? You aren't really looking at the entire value-adding process. But once they began to look at what it meant to be in the flow of the entire flow from earth to earth, I don't think cradle to cradle is quite right because it's too human a metaphor. I keep trying to wish Bill McDonough would talk more about earth to earth. It's really the earth we're talking about. And you could make that kind of link and connection as it moved through. Suddenly something different happened. So let's talk about what Frank found. Frank said that the essence, now the working from the regenerative mind is always working from essence. We aren't used to doing that. We don't look at the essence like the essence of this young woman who came and lived at my house was that of a gifted artist. So till we had her with a cello playing, her essence wasn't being lived out. What's the essence of a healthy forest? Any of you interested in forestry? I lived with a forester for 25 years. Any of you have you been a part of Greenpeace or tree huggers or anything else who've worked with forests? Oh, y'all aren't that radical, huh? It's fun. You should go hug some trees. It turns out that forests may be one of the most important ecological systems on the planet. And that was what Frank was figuring out, that it really is about a regenerative ecology. But that mindset is the one that we have to move. The regenerative ecology of the forest is the one that we had to come to understand. The other thing that was fun about what DuPont of Canada did after Frank got to being in the forestry business, I mean, he still worked for DuPont, he still worked in peroxide, was they began to understand what it took to create integrated teams inside of the DuPont of Canada system. And they worked with them so closely that it became a sold-out business. That's the business side. And there was no ever loss of share to anyone else because they were so integrated with their downstream customers. Kingsford Charcoal is another company I've worked with for a long time. And when we first started working with them, they were being highly threatened by gas grills. So any of you in here charcoal at all? Do you ever cook out? Some? Yeah? What do you cook on? Gas. Anybody in here cook on non-gas grill? On a charcoal grill? Okay. Why do you do that? Why do you cook on charcoal instead of a gas grill? That's what you have. But, yeah, so you have a really tiny one. Yeah, but they have tiny gas grills too. Is there anybody else? Why do you cook on a charcoal instead of gas? Ah, right. Now, part of what was going on with, however, gas grills for a long time is they weren't so great, right? You had to dump tons of fluid on the charcoal to get it going, so you may not have gotten the gas flavor, but what you got was the lighter fluid flavor instead. No, of course not. You wouldn't do that, right? You use, huh? Exactly. It defeated the purpose. That was the whole point of the thing. But when we started working with the charcoal plants, they were up against this problem with gas grills. And their first thoughts were, believe it or not, what we should do is just get more efficient so we can sell our charcoal for less, and then people will use it instead of biogas grills. So that was the efficiency mindset, working on problem solving. But they also had a president of the company, Will Lynn, who was very interested in the environmental side. And he said, I would like for us to save water. I'd like for us to save heat. I'd like for us not to waste things. I'd like for us to really be efficient. I'd like for it to improve the business, but I'd like to do it in a way that actually improves the environment, please. So people worked on that, and they got some efficiencies. They worked on it as much as they could. In fact, they even moved up to creating a closed system approach to briquetting. But then there was another guy, and this guy's name was Carl. Carl was in the process with us working on what it meant to be in a regenerative thinking process. And so his mind's saying, my goodness, what is the essence of briquetting? I'm responsible for making these briquettes. Now, briquetting is a matter of creating a bunch of slurry out of lignite and, some coal products and woods and so forth. Then you put it into these molds, almost like you're making biscuits. You got an image of a biscuit pan, right? And then you shove it in an oven and you had a whole lot of heat and you come out on the other side and you've got this little pillow. So Frank is watching this process. He's saying, okay, I got it. Over here we have a formula that tells us this much water. All right, we get the slurry going, then we get it to the nice consistency. We pour it into these pans and we add tons of heat to take out the water we just put in. So he started trying to figure out what, he went to the R&D group and he said, why is it we put so much water in? Now this is the story like your mother, the story that says, why do you cut off this part of the ham when you're putting it into the oven? They say, because I only had a pan that size, and so every generation past had cut off the end of the ham even when they had a pan this big. They had been making charcoal the same way because they didn't actually know, and they'd finally found a few formulas that worked, and they'd made it the same way for 25 years. So Frank says, let's figure out how it is, what would it really take to make exactly the right kind of briquette? Well, he found the interesting thing was, as he began to understand the working of this system, he created a process along with some of the R&D people, and this guy has a high school education, lived in the backwoods country of West Virginia, had never been involved in being educated in sustainability, but he wanted to learn how to think about the essence of something. And what he did, he asked what's the essence of briquetting, and he said, it's managing heat, isn't it? So when you put the charcoal in, you're trying to manage the heat to be exactly the right timing, for exactly the right duration, with exactly the right intensity, and it didn't always work perfectly. And he said, if that's what we're doing, then that's all we need to do. How can I make a briquette that does that? Well, it turned out that if you put in a lot less water and you use a lot less heat, you actually get a briquette that cooks better. So Frank deciding, instead of just working on sustainability, all the pieces, he said, all right, I can try and figure out how to save water. I can figure out how to save heat, because they were doing that. But if you really look at what the essence of the briquette is, I can invent a better briquette. By doing that, they actually took over the market because they created products that didn't need lighter fluid, right? That were able to cook over a longer period of time.